So you find me this afternoon looking a little bit dishevelled. Not my bestest look, I must admit, but I thought I would do this before I got involved in doing something else. And the something else is sort of here, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, if at the beginning of the week you subscribe to one of the Roland websites, now either you subscribe to the UK website or the US website, God, my hair looks awful, you would have received an email. And that email says something along the lines of, to quote, the future is redefined. And what they've said is there are some announcements being made on the 26th, 1st, 23rd and 20th of June. And if it keeps still for long enough, I'll tell you what they're all about. So what I did was I looked at the page, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on the 26th which seems of May, which seems to be around drums and percussion. Not really interested in that stuff. Then there seems to be a whole raft of stuff around the 1st of June, which is sort of guitar products and pro video. Not really interested in that stuff either. Then on the 20th of June it says synthesizer. And there's 2 slots on the 20th of June for synthesizer. Interested in that. And then on the 23rd of June, it says guitar products. Not really interested in that either. So, going back, what do we think Roland has cooked up for us this time round on the 20th? I am wondering whether there is more smart plugins for the System 8 coming. At least one of those dates will be plugins for the System 8. I have very little to base that on, apart from I've seen a couple of comments on some user group sites that caused me to think maybe that is what is coming. I could completely be wrong, of course, but Roland did this to us last year, if we remember, in September, when they launched the System 8 itself. And then they proceeded to go through and update all the VSDs and plugins for the SH101, the SH102, the Pro Mars, and then they gave us obviously the Jupiter 8 and the Juno 106 plugins for the System 8 itself. So, do we think that something is going to come out along those lines? Do we think there's going to be another legacy synthesizer launched onto that platform? Don't know. Might be interesting to see what sort of the murmurings, because when the System 8 came out about a month beforehand, we all sort of started to get an idea that it was coming, and then of course someone dropped a bollock and released the, I think it was Sweetwater, wasn't it? Sweetwater released their magazine, and their in prime location was the new synthesizer in their magazine before Roland had launched it. Oh dear. Anyway, just interesting that there is something coming. So just a little over a month to go. So let's see what happens. The second thing I wanted to bring up today, and it's really more for those of you who are like me, collect the vintage memorabilia that goes with keyboards that we might own. Those of you who know and watch the channel regularly know I hark on about the cartridges for DX7s, etc. So what I did see this week is that there is a website, or on eBay, so if you go to eBay and you do a DX7 search, there is a guy in Japan at the moment who is selling, there you go, you can just see that on there, 3 of the DX7 original cartridges in their original boxes for $125. Plus, if you're living in the UK, approximately $15 to ship. Personally, I've got those already. However, if you haven't got them, I would suggest you bite his hand off, because that sounds like incredibly good value to me. So that's translates into pounds at about £96, which is about 33 pounds a cartridge. which is good value for those cartridges. So I'd bite his hand off if I were you. So let's see if someone goes and buys those. Interesting. Now to the keyboard. Now today, the reason why we are doing this video late today is not because I've been out on my bike, which is normally the reason, or I've been out having dinner, which is again a good reason. But the reason today that we're doing this video rather late is because I have picked up one of those keyboards I had on my I want one of these lists, sort of wish list type thing. And I've been monitoring eBay and a couple of other sources probably now for about good 18 months, I would say. And I've seen a couple of these come up, but they've always been US based, and I don't really want to go through the melee of mucking around with the power card again, like I've had to do on a couple of other pieces. Some of them are relatively easy to do. So for example, the Roland D50 is just a case of resoldering the wire from the 110 input to the 240 input or the 220 input on the transformer, and job's a good one. You can then use that in the UK with no issue. When I bought my M1, I bought an absolutely beautiful M1. It was so clean, it's unbelievable. Sorry, my M1R, I should say. So clean, it was unbelievable, but it was US spec. And what I did there was I literally bought a old M1R which was being broken for spares, and I swapped the power board out. Relatively easy to do, and it gave me a UK spec machine, which again has been sitting in my studio for the last years and works perfectly. So I've been looking for one of these for quite a while, and yesterday one came up on eBay. I quickly put a bid in and I bought it. So thank you, Nigel. I've been down this morning and picked it up. So what is it? Yes, it is the legendary Korg T1. So why have I been after a Korg T1? Well, actually, a couple of reasons. Number one, it is an M1 on steroids, is the way I would describe this. So what Korg did in the late stages of the M1 development is they came up with the M1 EX, right? Or M1R EX, which became the M1 Rex. But they never made a rack mount module of the T series. So there was 3 keyboards in the T series. There was the T1, which was the daddy of the keyboards. There was a T2, which was a 76 note, but not a weighted keyboard like this one is. And then there was the 61 note T3, which was sort of a more or less a clone of the M1 in many respects, if I'm honest. But the T series itself has 8 meg of wave ROM, as opposed to the M1, which was 4 meg of wave ROM. You know, again, you know, sort of sitting here where we are now in 2017, talking about 8 meg of wave ROM, you know, when we're quite often looking at machines with gigabytes of RAM on them, we're going, well, that doesn't sound a lot. But believe me, when these machines were built, 8 meg of wave ROM was a big deal. It really was a big deal. I mean, you know, it's doubled what the M1 had, and it doubled the way the presets work. So my job over the coming weeks is to look at this keyboard, because Nigel, who sold it to me, said there were a couple of things that he wasn't sure about, and some of the buttons seem to do weird things. So it looks like it's a case of let's strip it down and have a look at the contacts and see what else is going on inside this beauty. But you will have to admit that this is a beautiful keyboard. It really is. I am so absolutely rapt to have been able to purchase one of these, and I shall let you know how we go in terms of putting this back together. Now, one of the things that needs to be done is it's a little bit battered and frayed around the edges. You know, it's been in the wars, not massively in the wars. It looks like it's been fairly well kept. I know the guy I've just bought this off of pretty much had this under covers and in storage, so he's looked after it, and apparently the guy he bought it off of also looked after it, so there's sort of a little bit of a heritage there that I can sort of take some credence that it has been looked after. The keyboard action itself seemed beautiful on this, just from a very quick play with it myself. So I can't really say much more about this keyboard because I'm really rapt that I've bought it. I have been looking for one of these for so long, and now I actually have one. So now people will probably say, well, what about the Kronos? Well, let's put it this way. The Kronos is my de facto go-to keyboard. It always has been for the last year, 18 months since I've owned it. The Kronos is so much more than a keyboard. It is, you know, it really is the sort of the grown-up version of where these keyboards were going. So the M1 was really the start of it. They went through several different iterations of keyboard trying to sort of get to where we got to now. So, you know, and I may get these out of sequence, so I do apologise, but it was the M1, it was the M series, it was the T series, it was Triton. Then there was another one, wasn't there? Was it the Trinity? Then there was the Oasis, and then there's been the Kronos, and we're now on the third iteration of Kronos, aren't we? With the LS just being launched just over a week ago. No, probably about a month ago. God, doesn't time fly? But I still use my Kronos. It's my go-to. It's my go-to keyboard when I sit down to play. So why have I bought a T1? Well, to be honest, I love the sounds of the M1. I really do. It's a shame it doesn't have a weighted keyboard on it. The T1 will take the stock sounds of the M1 and replicate them. It has not that you can see it, of course, but let's see if I can turn that around like that. So just off camera, or just on camera, you have the actual 2 ROM sockets here. So that's everything you need to know, and as you can see, it's still in absolutely beautiful condition on the back here, where the cards would go in. So that is all absolutely gorgeous. So you can take an M1 card and you can put it in here. Now what's really interesting is that off the M series, I've always had on my M1 and my M1R issues with the M3R cards. Now you see quite a lot of people who put the M3R cards out on eBay and say it's compatible with the M1. I've never really got to the bottom of that, and nobody's really answered any questions about the M3R and the M1R. Now I know an M1 card will be read by an M3, but an M3 card doesn't seem to want to be read by my M1. I'm not sure whether that is because my M1 can't read it. Maybe this one could, but I've always had issues with the M3 cards, so I've never bought the M3 cards. But having said that, I now have a complete set of factory M1 cards. So every card that the factory threw out, I now have, including the elusive environmental card. Yeah, the environmental card, which is the green one. Now you don't see that very often, but I managed to pick that up not that long ago, actually. Not that long ago, but that's the elusive one, because you don't see that one very often. So there you go. Now the other thing people quite often say is, why don't I use the legacy? Not the legacy, is it? It's the I'm trying to think. The recent program that's been issued by Korg for these machines, and the answer is I do, but I still like to play the damn things. There's something fundamental about actually playing these instruments rather than using the VSTs. I've said it before, I'll say it again. These instruments were there to be played, and that's how I intend to use these instruments when I'm doing whatever I'm doing. Computer-based music is there for some, and some people will use the computers solely to make the music they make. I do not. I would rather play the instrument, and I'd rather go and buy the instrument to play it. And again, many of you who watch the channel regularly will know that I am building up quite a stock of legacy instruments. In fact, I mean, I've now got quite a few now in storage, which have now been serviced and they've been put away. And when I get a bigger studio, which I do intend to do later in this year, because my studio is now at bursting point, some of those will be coming back. Now, some of them may stay in storage for a period of time, which is all well and good, because I tend to take keyboards in and out of storage on how I feel. You would have seen last week when I did the rant that I actually sort of showed off my D20. Now, you probably heard me talk about the D20 in past on the rants. And last week when I showed it off, it come back from long-term borrow. So a friend of mine has had that on long-term borrow. He basically was burgled and lost all his equipment because he had his equipment at his house, which I do not. So he effectively lost everything. So I loaned him a number of keyboards, one of which was the D20, and it's been returned. And I've been reacquainting myself with the D20, so you probably will see some stuff coming through. And I said that last week as well. I might actually get around to doing it. I'm got loads of other stuff going on at the moment, which is particularly nasty, so it's just zapping my time. Anyway, so I have a T1, and I am absolutely wrapped. And if Nigel watches this, thank you, buddy. It was a pleasure to meet you. I do hope your endeavour goes well, and please keep in touch, because I'd love to know where you're going. I'd love to come down and see where the endeavour goes and how you get on. So please invite me back. And if anything else, I mean, I'd love to help you with some of the knowledge I have on some of the problems you were outlining to me that you might have coming forward. Anyway, I love you. I love you and leave you now. Have a great Sunday, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. I've been told it helps the channel out greatly if you hit the like button if you enjoyed the contents of this video. If you want to be notified about future videos that may be made for the channel, please hit the subscribe button.